Thanks everyone for joining us on the news briefing at this unusual time on this Wednesday. This coming weekend is something of a milestone. It marks the 1-year anniversary of the Pajaro levee breach. It has been a very long year for people who were affected by the disaster and people who were supporting the community during the disaster. And we want to take this opportunity to take a look at a timeline and look at the year in review and how this community is going to recover. So we're very pleased to have Kelsey Scanlon, the director of our Department of Emergency Management, and some of our partners in this recovery and response process to take a look at the last year. Kelsey, thanks very much for taking the time to do this.
It's honestly my pleasure, and it's an honor, Maya, to have been able to serve the Pajaro community for the past year. I am I'm honestly really overwhelmed in general with the amount of community support, local support, state support, and federal support throughout the duration of the incident. And even still today, we very much have partners locally at the state level, at the federal level, supporting some of our long-term recovery efforts. And so I'm going to really just highlight some of the areas that we were able to serve the community. It likely will not be the full breadth of what we were able to accomplish, but it is certainly quite exhaustive. And so at the top of this is we had a 68-day incident period. We had 4 proclamations across the Monterey County operational area, including some political subdivisions. We had 2 emergency operations centers in the county activated, as well as department operation centers, and over 200 disaster service workers serving the community throughout the duration, and even still today. The federal incident start period was actually February 21st for the region, which was not necessarily applicable to Monterey County. Our local incident started March 9th, 2023. The EOC activated that same day. Evacuation warnings were also issued that same day. And then the next day on March 10th, evacuation orders were issued, and the levee breached late March 10th into March 11th. And it would be on March 23rd, 2023, that the evacuation orders were lifted, and then the federal declaration occurring on April 3rd. Let's see. So what I'm going to talk about is this full process from start to finish, our preparedness efforts, our search and rescue efforts, everything from response to immediate recovery to long-term recovery. Preparedness really includes, emergency alert dissemination, evacuation warnings and orders issued prior to the emergency occurring, sand and sandbag distribution, flood fighting activities, and the emergency operations center activation. Sorry, there we go. During our response operations, we provided a various array of disaster response capabilities, including flood fighting that continued over from the preparedness phase into response, evacuations and rescues, drone team operations for situational awareness, care and shelter services, local assistance centers, commodity distribution, public information, debris removal, hygiene hubs, and damage assessments. Across the county, approximately 10,000 people were evacuated. Within Pajaro, about 3,000 to 4,000 people were evacuated. Just in the community of Pajaro alone, we had approximately 300 water rescues after the levee breached. And we were very fortunate to have no fatalities in the Monterey County operational area and 1 firefighter injury. Throughout the duration of the event, our office disseminated 69 emergency alerts. 3 were related to preparedness, such as anticipation of flooding. 52 were related to issuing of evacuation orders and warnings and lifting of those. That's across the Monterey County operational area, not just in the community of Pajaro. And then we issued 5 water safety messages, as well as 9 road closure messages. during the response, while people were evacuated, the County of Monterey provided 3 temporary evacuation points, 5 shelters for 65 days of operation, and serving a little over 500 guests, excuse me. And this would range day to day. I realize that these two numbers are different. And totaling about $4 million in congregate shelter costs. We would later transition to non-congregate shelter, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Throughout the duration of the event, we had a very exhaustive public information campaign with 29 press conferences and briefings, 450 media interviews, 90 press releases, 100 media advisories, 435 original social media posts, and 262 hotline calls. Impacts to the community were extensive and significant. With the 3,000 people evacuated, there was obviously a need for sheltering and housing. Many of the structures were impacted, and we'll talk about damage assessments shortly. There was significant impact to critical infrastructure, significant impact to natural and cultural resources, and generally to the economy of approximately 600 million in damages to the agricultural industry and 30 million in damages to businesses and commercial structures. When we talk about community lifeline restoration, this is really the phase before evacuation orders are lifted and the immediate life safety response has dwindled. And it's that phase that I think is ultimately the most frustrating for people because they see that the water has receded, but we're still doing activities and they're not allowed back just yet. And so during this community lifeline restoration phase, we're prepping for reentry and repopulation. And so we have a responsibility to ensure that emergency levee repairs are taking place, the sewage system repairs are taking place, as well as water system repairs and testing, road and bridge repairs, utility restoration, conducting damage assessments, and demobilizing heavy equipment that might be dangerous to residents coming into the area. For context, you can see these are just in the unincorporated area under Monterey County Public Works, the number of storm projects or damages and repairs that occurred between the January storm and the March storm. So all over the county, but a vast majority of it focused in North County. Through our damage assessment process, we were able to conduct through a CAL FIRE DINS team 1,046 total inspections, identifying 446 total damaged and destroyed structures across the Monterey County operational area. We were fortunate that only 7 of that 446 were red tagged and destroyed. Though heartbreaking for those 7 families, I expected this number to actually be higher as we went into the damage assessments. And I don't want to diminish the significance of what damaged means as well. The fact that 240 single-family residence structures and 42 multi-family residential structures were identified based on FEMA standards for flood categories does not fully encompass the total amount of damages that this community experienced. Far more than 446 structures were impacted by some amount of flood damage. And so this is really the farther end of the spectrum of significant impact. In short-term recovery, we really focused on lifting evacuation orders, bringing people back into the area that was semi-safe. It didn't need to be the full extent to which it was prior to the disaster, but at least safe enough to navigate throughout the right-of-way. And so we looked at providing water distribution because the water system had been compromised. We looked at providing commodity distribution because much of the commercial industry had been significantly impacted. We provided hygiene hubs, including restrooms, showers, and laundry because people were unable to flush or drink the water. We provided food distribution because people were unable to cook because of destroyed utilities and like stoves, white goods, or what we call them, within the dwellings. And we also offered actually our first curbside debris removal program. Through the comfort and hygiene hubs that people came home to, we provided 2.8 thousand pounds of pet food, 43 meals distributed, 19,000 loads of laundry services, 10,000 uses of the showers, and 3,000 to 5,000 gallons in water distribution. And this operation occurred for 52 days at 2 different locations. Through our curbside debris removal program, we were able to offer 9,000 cubic yards of debris removal, 7,000 cubic yards of household debris removed, 2,000 cubic yards of mud debris removed, and the cost of this program was approximately $1.6 million. In the immediate recovery phase, we really focused on not just that critical lifeline, but tiding people over while they were conducting repairs of their structures. So we provided non-congregate sheltering. We provided local assistance centers. We worked with FEMA to establish disaster recovery centers. We stood up a community-based organization assistance center. We worked with Hope Crisis Network to conduct home repairs. Disaster case management was established, and we offered recovery town halls. This was also around the time that Assembly Bill 102, $20 million was allocated. So in the summer, fall area, and provided community listening sessions and long-term recovery planning meetings. The non-congregate shelter program is also something that was very new and novel for us. We had, other than Project Room Key during COVID, had never done this for any other emergency before. And it was originally designed as a 63-day program. And upon receiving 265 guests into our program, we quickly identified that there was a greater need beyond 63 days. And so this program, which started as 63 days, actually spanned the breadth of 6 months. And during that program, we provided feeding, housing navigation, and case management. In September of 2023, the Board of Supervisors identified a greater need to transition many of these families to community homeless solutions for, I believe, sorry, that says 1 year, but it should say 6-month program to provide temporary navigational assistance and housing navigation and rapid rehousing. I am very excited to say that the 37 people from 10 households that went into the Community Homeless Solutions program funded by the county all have been rehoused except for 3 households. 2 are in the process of being rehoused 2 are in the approval process for accessing housing. And this program ends March 30th, 2024. So a really fantastic example of where government can serve in the immediate crisis to help people who are extremely vulnerable access very necessary housing resources post-disaster. And also a really great connection between emergency management and social services in that transition from recovery to long-term housing. Through our local assistance center that we established, we had 23 agencies representing county, state, and federal agencies. The local assistance center was open for 14 days in 2 different locations, and we had 1,143 engagements with the community. The Community-Based Resource Center had 23 organizations, and this lasted 26 days, and they had about 410 engagements with the community. About halfway through the year, we really started focusing on planning for long-term recovery. And we really wanted to get an understanding of the community's vision for what long-term recovery looked like. And so we established the Pajaro Revitalization Committee and really worked with them to create priorities and how in this transition process from short-term recovery to long-term recovery, we could develop projects and programs that would accommodate that community vision. So we focused on infrastructure, natural and cultural resources, health and social services, housing and community development, economic development, and public safety. As I had mentioned previously, Assembly Bill 102 was provided to us out of the state funds, and we are greatly appreciative for our state legislators for advocating on our behalf. And through a 6-month community-led engagement program, we utilize what's called the spectrum of community engagement to ownership. to help guide us in that process so that it really was a community-led engagement, and that people's voices were being not just heard, but listened to and then implemented in policy and programs. And we provided multilingual and culturally sensitive community meetings to help people gather and feel comfortable with sharing their input. This was ultimately approved by the Monterey County Board of Supervisors. As I had mentioned before, throughout the recovery process, we provided several opportunities for the community to express and share with us their experience. And we've had very impressive turnout, and we're very grateful for the community coming in after hours, after they've worked all day, to share their input with us. The first meeting was really focused about gathering ideas, gathering projects that could potentially be turned into actual programs. The second meeting was really focused on which of these are feasible, how can we actually implement this and fold this into local government, and reduced it down to 22 projects. And then meeting 3 was a community vote, where people were able to provide their preference and priority for each of these projects. And then a final list was presented to the board in December, and the community had very graciously come to those meetings and shared their preference for how the money be spent, and the board ultimately modified the original proposal to better reflect the community desire. And so this was the final project list. And so we, over the next 2 years, will be focusing on rolling this out. And most importantly, we've been focusing on rolling out the individual and household assistance program, as well as the small business program. I think throughout the duration of the event, it was extremely disheartening for me to see our community members approach FEMA for very needed relief funds. And you can see on the left-hand column here, the eligibility rate has actually gone down over the last couple of weeks, in that only 45.7% of the community members who have applied for FEMA individual assistance are actually eligible. And so there's obviously a very great need that's not being met through this federal program. And so through the Pajaro Unmet Needs Assistance Program and Small Business Assistance Program, we're hoping that we can continue to help the community recover and get them the resources that they need. That was a year in a review in, I think, 10 minutes.
Wow, Kelsey, that's very impressive. So we have a couple other people who want to share information that kind of will do more to illustrate some of the things that Kelsey was talking about. So if Supervisor Church doesn't mind, I'd like to bring in Patsy Gasca from the Red Cross to talk about their partnership with the county during the times when shelter was desperately needed. Hi, Patsy.
Hi, thank you. And thank you for the invite. Yes, definitely. Yeah, what Kelsey covered is where the Red Cross was from day one, supporting the congregate shelters and the mobile feeding, the fixed feeding sites, making sure that unmet medical needs are taken care of, both physically and emotional support for residents that have been quite traumatized from it. And then up to current, making sure, well, there, even at the congregate shelter, we took the opportunity to also provide preparedness training for the children. We had many children at the congregation site, which was at the shelter. And then following up with the families subsequently when they were moved over into the hotels. Since then, we continue to meet with the residents on Fridays through Casa de la Cultura, and also gauging some of the needs as folks are coming back to their homes, those that have been lucky enough to return, and seeing what's out there, what are they needing, what can we connect them with. One of the biggest things is requests for smoke alarms, of which we're happy to do and have been installing quite a few in the area of Pajaro, making sure that they have that critical support. Pajaro is a very, very giving community, but have been affected on so many levels, and we're there for them. We've been there from the beginning, and we'll continue to be there till every resident that is able to move back comes back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. And then I see Supervisor Church. Yeah, turn your camera back on. Finally, your turn. We're very pleased to have Supervisor Church here. He's a representative for this district, and it was like before his first day on the job that this all happened. So Supervisor Church, we'd love to hear from you about the last year.
Sure. Thank you, Maya. Yeah, it was literally before my first day on the job because I wasn't inaugurated till January 3rd, and I was already having meetings that weekend before when we were worried about those December and January storms. I wanted to, really kind of look at the community a lot there and realize that this community, as we all know, has had decades of neglect. It's a community of working people that were economically stressed before this disaster. So this just added to it. And while we can't really address all this neglect, right now, I'm really hopeful when I look at what we're proposing, what we've done, what is coming down in the future, in the near future, in the long term, this community is going to be able to come back and be something stronger than what it was. There has been probably last year about $10 million in direct assistance that went to people. Now we're going to add in, and this is money that was coming from the federal, state, and the county. Now we're talking about another 20 million coming in for more direct assistance and infrastructure. So there's a lot of resources coming into there. And yet, there was already plans to go through and do some improvements on this community. Public Works, Monterey County Public Works has about ready to start in about a year from now on development on Salinas Road. There's going to be side street paving. This is an addition to this 20 million. This was already planned. So this community is going to go through a lot of changes and a lot of very positive changes out of here. I do want to just kind of emphasize a little bit on the on those meetings that the Department of Emergency Management that Kelsey was referring to here. And they had this great turnout, and she went over some of these big meetings. But we also had these a lot of small meetings, these cafecitos, where they were started off with 10 people, and more people would come to those, and more people would come to the big meetings. And this is what is really kind of unique in this whole situation, is that usually when you have long-term community meetings, you have a drop-off involvement. This was absolutely the opposite. It increased with attention into there. And one of the reasons I'm also really hopeful is because the community is organized. There's a residents group, there's a business group that hasn't been there before. I'm hopeful that there's going to be something like a Chamber of Commerce coming out of this. So there's a brighter future than there was before this disaster. And there's no silver lining you can put up on a disaster like this. People have suffered and have lost a lot, but there is a brighter future. And I think that's the thing that we really have to look at this point. That the involvement that we had from people in the community was actually was historic. We've never done anything quite on this scale, and I'm hopeful in the years ahead we're going to have a better and a stronger community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Church. So we're going to open it up for some questions, and I do have some questions in chat. And these specific questions, there's a lot of questions in one single one. So I'm going to kind of break apart some of these questions for you. And Kelsey, I think some of these first ones are for you.
I think a good portion of these might be for me.
Yeah. So the first question is, community advocates and residents say the emergency response and communication was confusing and not organized last year on March 11th, specifically regarding the evacuation list. Can you respond to that? Let's break it off there.
Of course. So I do really first want to acknowledge that between January and March, we had already evacuated the community of Pajaro once before. And I think there was some evacuation fatigue as we came into the March event. One of the things that we've learned post-incident is that a vast majority of the community is not registered in the emergency alert system. And I think I would attribute that communication struggle with the lack of registration, because evacuation warnings and orders are issued through the emergency alert system. During one of the community meetings, I asked everyone to raise their hand if they were registered for the emergency alert system. I think maybe 2 of the 150 people there actually raised their hand. And so that's been extremely eye-opening for us as a communication limitation. And so we've been working to develop advertising specific to the community of Pajaro for increasing registration in the alert system, as well as reevaluating policies for utilizing the wireless emergency alert system. And we have been working to go door to door to register households for the emergency alert system. And so I think that was a communication limitation. From our side, from within the Emergency Operations Center, the coordination works well. We communicate effectively with our PIOs, with law enforcement, with fire. If those communication channels in general, not just in particular to this incident, if those communication channels are not directly connected with the community, that's where you see that communication gap and the lack of coordination. We found throughout this process that the community does not follow the communication methods that the county traditionally uses, such as traditional media, social media, websites. A vast majority of the community communication is actually face-to-face and friend-to-friend or neighbor-to-neighbor. And so we've also really been working to establish relationships in the community that can be a voice multiplier when we disseminate messages, so that community members who are receiving information from their neighbors know that it's a trusted source. And having that relationship prior to any disaster was something that we had struggled to do. And so we've really been mindful to continue to develop relationships with the nonprofit community, as well as residents in the community who are considered community leaders. And my hope is that through that process, we can provide edification on what it is that the county does and doesn't do, what the Emergency Operations Center can and can't do, and everything in between.
Thank you, Kelsey. And there were a lot of questions in this one question, but there was one thing that we might want to break out. And part of the question said, who is in charge of alerting Pajaro residents when there is a flood or disaster?
That's a really great question. It's also somewhat complex and nuanced. So the Monterey County Emergency Communications Department is the primary alerting authority in the county. Monterey County Department of Emergency Management and subsequently the Emergency Operations Center holds the contracts for and is also a secondary alerting authority. When the EOC is activated, which during this incident, it was prior to the levee breach, the EOC takes the primary role in disseminating emergency alerts. And so the emergency alerts were disseminated by the Monterey County Department of Emergency Management.
Thank you. And then there was a second part, there was a second question in this group of questions about yellow tagged and red tagged buildings. I don't know if we've inquired of building services for this information. I don't know if you have it or we should wait for a building response. We're looking for the remaining, what buildings remain tagged.
I do not have that number now, but our hope, we're very aware that because of the large population of renter-occupied structures, there's very likely a large portion that have not completed renovations, or they're struggling to contact with the landlords to actually complete the renovations. Our hope is that through this Pajaro Unmet Needs program, we can get a better understanding of what property owners need to conduct those repairs, and what the delta is between what they've received from FEMA and what they need to actually make the repairs.
Thank you. And for anyone who didn't know, and Kelsey, correct me if I'm wrong, there were 6 red tagged buildings after the levee breach and after the inspections. I don't recall how many yellow tagged buildings there were, but yellow tags were more accessible to residents. They could go in, they could make repairs without, and the red tag was much more severe.
Affirmative.
Are there any other questions for our Patsy from the Red Cross, Supervisor Church, or Kelsey on the Pajaro recovery and timeline? Because then we've got some questions about what was happening this afternoon. And since we have you, Kelsey, maybe we can ask you what the latest is in North County with the sudden flooding. We do know that temporary evacuation point has been set up at the Prunedale Library. Is there any other information you think people should know right now?
Yeah, so I can't comment specifically on the weather pattern that occurred. We haven't had a moment to chat with National Weather Service, but my understanding is that a flash flood warning was issued, and approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, about 20 to 30 homes experienced inundation of water about halfway up the door structure. North County Fire has conducted water rescues, about half a dozen to a dozen water rescues. We've established a temporary evacuation point at the Prunedale Library. American Red Cross is on site at the temporary evacuation point to connect residents with sheltering services, as well as an MST bus from the incident area to the temporary evacuation point. And that is all I have for now.
Yeah, and I think Patsy may have gone off to do that because I don't see her. Oh no, she is. Patsy,
I'm still here.
You can share with folks about what your efforts are right now.
Sure. I've dispatched a volunteer there that will field any questions of residents that may be coming to the center about any unmet needs they may have. My representative will be there. We have a second one coming, and then I'll be making my way following this meeting as well to see what unmet needs there are there.
Any questions for Patsy or Kelsey on the current situation?
Hi, Victor Guzman with KIO, and hopefully y'all can hear me. Does it, this is my ignorance, of course, but does it often flood over in the Ralph Lane area? We also heard of some issues over in Bolsa Knolls too. Just trying to get a rundown on that, but also just the history. We all know Bolsa Knolls has its history, but as far as Ralph Lane, I know it's kind of in a low-lying area too, but
in my 6 years here, I've never seen this kind of flooding in that particular neighborhood. It was very much surprising to us.
Yeah, Victor, I've never heard of anything out there, and I'm a lifelong resident, and this was really a real freakish. I was just over at the Elkhorn Slough Foundation with a meeting, and I got back to my office, and I hear it was raining. I was outside; there was no rain, and that's just a couple miles away. So this is just a freakish storm.
And as far as what the situation at Bolsa Knolls, Kelsey, have you heard any updates in regards to that, or Patsy, if you have folks over there too?
We don't. Historically, that area has flooded in the past, and we've seen few folks evacuate from that area. Of course, when we get any calls, we field those through our 800 number if anybody has any unmet needs. But we rarely hear from anybody in that area.
And Chiara from the Herald asked if Bolsa Knolls and Ralph Lane are the only areas affected. There may be areas just adjacent to them that might be seeing some impacts, but would you say those are the general areas that are affected?
Affirmative. I'm not currently aware of other areas that may be impacted. But I feel from what I can gather of the National Weather Service, the rain ban was specifically in alignment with that corridor.
And then we also see from Public Works indicated that there are some county roads in that area that are also closed. You can check our county road information page. Will be updated and show what roads are closed and then also when they will reopen. Are there any other questions for any of our guests today?
Can I just make one final comment, Maya?
Yes, please.
So I know very much that it has been a very long and slow journey this past almost 365 days since the levee broke. Our office is acutely aware of the trauma that comes along with any disaster, but most especially in our highly vulnerable populations. And I think one of the things that we have really learned over the past year is that resilience is something that requires a grassroots commitment, and the Pajaro community is committed to increasing their own resilience, and that's something that we're here to facilitate at their request and in support of their vision. And I know that there has been frustrations in the past with the county, but the commitment that we have made continuously in our community outreach meetings is transparency to the best of our ability, and also the commitment that we will be here long after the AB 102 funds have been disseminated. It is very much the interest of this department and the county to continue to build resilient communities in the unincorporated area of Monterey County. And that includes more than just Pajaro. That includes areas like San Ardo, San Lucas, Chualar, Lockwood, Moss Landing, Castroville. We are very much interested in finding ways that we can work with our community partners and our community leaders to increase resilience amongst households. And so over the next couple of years, I'm hopeful that you'll see a lot of programs that are reflective of that priority come out of our office, as well as several other departments. And you can see some of the initiatives that we have proposed for 2024 in our annual report, which I'll include with Maya when she disseminates the PowerPoint. And so our vision for community resilience is very much in alignment with the Board of Supervisors. And that takes partnership, not just with the community members, but with our nonprofit partners. And we're very excited to do that and to see where emergency management can appropriately create novel programs that are focused on resilience prior to a disaster. And so with that, I will hand it back to you, Maya.
Thank you. And I wanted to offer Supervisor Church the last word, his thoughts for the future for Pajaro.
Yeah, I think I kind of addressed that a little bit in my discussion a few minutes ago, but I'll reemphasize it. I think with all these resources that are coming into there, and we've got a lot of infrastructure that is going to be done. There's work being done at the Porterhouse, which is the library, which will be a community center. There's the road work that's being done. There's a lot of community grants. There's millions in community grants that are going to be made available. So this is an opportunity for something to be really community driven and come up, and not top down, but for people in the community to identify things that need to be addressed, things that they feel that have been overlooked, and to get that presented to the county so we can fund them. Plus, again, we have a really much more organized community, and I think this bodes well for the future of Pajaro.
Thank you, Supervisor. We did have one last question about the MSD bus that's coming up to Prunedale. Will it be transporting people out of Ralph Lane? Will it be on the 101 side or the Harrison? I think it's Harrison Road side. Do you know?
I don't have a response at this time, but I can work on that.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us on the news briefing this week. Our next briefing will be next week, and we'll see you then.
Oh, damn.